Welcome to Astrid's Tales. Here's today's story.
I just watched my former best friend and business partner stand on a stage and accept a Tech Innovator Award for a software architecture that I wrote in my pajamas 3 years ago. They think they won. They think the $2 million in VC funding they just secured is their ticket to the big leagues. What they don't know is that the entire platform is built on a logic bomb. I buried in the source code the day I realized they were planning to cut me out. In exactly 48 hours, their entire database will begin to encrypt itself, and I'm the only one with the key. Am I the asshole? To understand why I'm about to dismantle a multi-million-dollar company from my laptop, you have to understand the genesis of the betrayal. It didn't start with lawyers or locked doors. It started with cheap pizza, stale coffee, and a friendship I thought was unbreakable. 3 years ago, Mark, Sarah, and I were not just colleagues. We were a tribe. We were the classic startup cliché. 320-somethings fueled by caffeine and the delusion that we could disrupt a trillion-dollar industry from a garage in San Jose. The industry was logistics, specifically predictive routing for mid-tier freight companies. It sounds boring, I know, but to me, it was a beautiful, chaotic puzzle waiting to be solved. The existing systems were reactive. They looked at traffic jams after they happened. My idea, which I christened Sentry, was different. It used machine learning to predict bottlenecks before they formed, analyzing everything from weather patterns to local construction permits to historical accident data. It was proactive. It was revolutionary. I was the architect. I lived in the code. I spent my nights debugging neural networks and my days optimizing server loads. I didn't care about the money or the fame. I cared about the elegance of the solution. Mark was the face. He was the kind of guy who could sell ice to a polar bear and make the bear thank him for the privilege. He had a smile that disarmed you and a handshake that felt like a contract. He knew nothing about Python or SQL, but he knew how to make people believe in the magic of what I was building. Sarah was the organizer. She was the one who kept the lights on, literally and figuratively. She handled the spreadsheets, the incorporation documents, or so I thought, and the endless administrative minutiae that bored Mark and me to tears. She was the glue that held our chaotic little universe together. We had a verbal agreement, shaken on over a stack of empty pizza boxes at 3 a.m., equal thirds. We were partners. We were going to change the world together. I trusted them with my life, and more importantly, I trusted them with my intellectual property. The early days were intoxicating. We worked out of my garage, surrounded by servers I had built from spare parts. Mark would pace the driveway on his phone, pitching potential beta testers, his voice rising and falling in that rhythmic cadence of the born salesman. Sarah would be at a folding table in the corner, typing furiously on her laptop, ensuring we didn't run afoul of zoning laws or tax codes, and I would be in the zone, headphones on, building the brain of Sentry line by line. We're going to be huge, Mark would say, clapping me on the shoulder after I showed him a successful simulation where Sentry rerouted a fleet around a predicted pileup, saving the hypothetical company thousands in fuel and delay costs. You're a genius, man. A literal genius. We're a team, I'd correct him, feeling a warm glow of belonging. I build the engine, you drive the car, and I make sure you have gas. Sarah would chime in, smiling over her glasses. It felt perfect. It felt like destiny. But looking back, I can see the cracks forming even then. There were hairline fractures in the foundation, invisible to the naked eye but fatal under pressure. The first sign was subtle. Mark started taking meetings without me. Just initial feelers, he'd say. Boring business stuff. You stay here and keep the code clean. That's your superpower. I didn't mind. I hated meetings. I hated wearing a suit. I was happy to stay in the garage and code. It felt like a fair division of labor. Mark handled the outside world. I handled the inside world. Then came the legal discussions. Sarah told me that her uncle, a corporate lawyer, had offered to handle our incorporation filings pro bono to save us money. Startups burn cash on legal fees, she explained. We need to be lean. Let my uncle handle the paperwork. You just focus on the product. I agreed. Why wouldn't I? Sarah was the organized one. She was the one who color-coded our Google Calendar. If she said she had the legal side covered, I believed her. I signed where she pointed, skimmed documents I didn't fully understand, and went back to my keyboard. The shift happened gradually over the course of a year. As Sentry moved from a prototype to a functional beta, the dynamic in the garage changed. Mark stopped asking me how the system worked and started asking when it would be ready. Sarah, we stopped joking about us being a three-headed monster and started talking about equity splits in vague, future tense terms. We need to formalize the partnership soon, I mentioned one afternoon. Sentry was about to launch with our first pilot client, a regional trucking firm. Absolutely, Mark said, not looking up from his phone. As soon as this pilot lands, we'll get the lawyers to draft the big contracts. Equal thirds, buddy. Just like we said. Sarah's uncle is drafting them now, Sarah added, offering me a reassuring smile. Don't worry, we've got you. They had me. All right. The realization didn't come all at once. It wasn't a dramatic movie moment where I overheard a nefarious conversation. It was a slow, creeping dread, a chill that started in my gut and worked its way out. It started with GitHub. One Tuesday morning, I tried to push a critical update to the Sentry repository. The terminal blinked back a red error message. Access denied. Permission revoked. I frowned. Glitches happened. I tried to log into the admin panel. Invalid credentials. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I called Mark. Straight to voicemail. I called Sarah. It rang 3 times, then went to voicemail. I grabbed my keys and drove to the small office space we had rented a month prior, a step up from the garage. Funded by our first small angel investment. When I arrived, my key didn't turn in the lock. I jiggled it, thinking I was just being clumsy. Then I looked at the lock cylinder. It was shiny, new brass. The scratches from my old key were gone. I stepped back and looked at the door. Taped to the glass, at eye level, was a thick cream-colored envelope with my name on it. My hands were shaking as I tore it open. Inside was a formal letter on heavy bond paper. The letterhead read, Haverford and Associates, Attorneys at Law. Dear Mr. My name, we represent MS Innovations Inc., formerly operating as the Sentry Project. This letter serves as formal notice that your services as an independent contractor are no longer required, effective immediately. Enclosed is a check for $5,000, representing a severance payment for your contributions to date. Please be advised that all intellectual property, source code, and proprietary algorithms developed during your tenure are the sole property of MS Innovations, pursuant to the work-for-hire agreement signed on date 6 months ago. Any attempt to access company servers, contact clients, or disparage the company will be met with immediate legal action. Sincerely, James Haverford. I stared at the letter. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Independent contractor, work for hire. I flashed back to the stack of papers Sarah had put in front of me 6 months ago. Just standard incorporation stuff, she had said, assigning the IP to the company so investors feel safe. I had signed it. I had signed my own death warrant. I pounded on the door. Mark, Sarah, open the damn door. The blinds in the office were drawn, but I saw a shadow move. They were in there. They were hiding. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mark again. This time, he answered. Don't make a scene, Mark said. His voice was calm, almost bored. It was his business voice. You changed the locks. I screamed into the phone. We're partners, equal thirds. We never signed a partnership agreement, Mark said smoothly. We signed a contractor agreement. You were paid for your code. You did a great job, really. But the company is moving in a different direction. We need enterprise scalability, not garage code. I built Sentry. I roared. It's my code. It's my brain. It's MS Innovations property, Mark corrected. Read the contract, buddy, and take the $5,000. It's generous. He hung up. I stood there in the parking lot, clutching a check for $5,000 and a letter that erased 3 years of my life. I didn't just lose my business. I lost my identity. I had handed them the keys to my mind, and they had changed the locks. The anger that follows a betrayal like that isn't hot. It's cold. It's a deep, vibrating chill in your bones that makes it hard to breathe. I spent a month in a daze. I barely left my apartment. I watched from afar as they rebranded my life's work. Sentry became Aegis. They launched a slick new website. Mark was featured in Wired magazine as a visionary disrupting the supply chain. Sarah was profiled in a Women in Tech blog. They were the golden couple of the startup world. And I was nothing professionally. I was ruined. I couldn't pitch Sentry to anyone else. They had already filed the provisional patents using the documentation I had written. If I tried to build it again, they could sue me for infringing on my own idea. I was a ghost in my own industry. I went to a lawyer, a sharp guy who specialized in IP theft. He looked over the documents Sarah had tricked me into signing. It's dirty, he admitted, tossing the papers onto his desk. But it's legally binding. You signed a work-for-hire agreement. Technically, you were never a partner. You were an employee. They own everything you touched. But it was verbal. I argued. We shook hands. There were witnesses. Verbal contracts are worth the paper they're printed on, he said grimly. To fight this, you'd need $200,000 for a retainer and about 5 years of your life. And even then, you might lose. They have the paperwork. You have a story. He leaned forward. Personal justice, he warned, is rarely legal justice. Move on, kid. Build something else. But I couldn't move on. How could I? They hadn't just stolen a car. They had stolen the engine I built by hand. Every time I saw a news article about Aegis securing another client, it felt like a physical blow. But there was one thing Mark and Sarah forgot. One variable they hadn't accounted for in their hostile takeover. Neither of them could code. They had hired a team of junior developers to maintain Aegis. I saw the job postings online. Junior Python developer, entry-level SQL admin. They were hiring cheap labor to keep the lights on. Those kids would be looking at the surface level, the UI, the API integrations. They wouldn't know the basement. They wouldn't know the deep architecture of that, and they certainly wouldn't know about the dead man switch weeks before the lockout. When the meetings started happening without me and the legal excuses started piling up, A paranoid voice in the back of my head had whispered a warning. Protect yourself. I hadn't wanted to believe it. These were my friends. But the code was neutral. The code didn't care about friendship. Late one night, fueled by intuition and insomnia, I had installed a logic bomb buried deep in the kernel of Sentry's routing algorithm. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't malware. It was a simple, elegant loop of logic. The system required a specific handshake, a cryptographic key that I had to manually input every 30 days. It was a maintenance protocol I told myself was for security. If the key wasn't entered, the system would assume it had been compromised. I told myself I'd remove it once we signed the official partnership papers. Obviously, those papers never came. When they locked me out, the countdown started. But I didn't let it trigger immediately. I had remote access to a backdoor of vulnerability in the server architecture I had left open for debugging. I logged in from a coffee shop 3 towns over, using a VPN and a masked MAC address. I found the logic bomb and modified the timer. I didn't want the system to crash while they were still small. That would be petty. A small crash they could recover from. They could rebrand, rebuild. No, I wanted to wait. I wanted them to climb. The higher they climbed, the harder they would fall. I set the timer to sleep and I waited. I watched them grow for 2 years. It was masochistic, but I couldn't look away. Aegis became a sensation. They signed regional carriers, then national ones. They secured a Series A round of funding for $5 million. They moved into a swanky office in downtown San Francisco with exposed brick and an espresso bar. Mark was everywhere. He did TED Talks. He was on podcasts talking about the philosophy of movement. He took credit for every line of code I wrote. I realized that traffic isn't just chaos, he'd say. It's a language, and we taught computers to speak it. It was nauseating. Sarah was the CFO now. She gave interviews about scaling lean and smart IP acquisition. Smart IP acquisition, that was code for stealing your best friend's work. I worked odd jobs, consulting under a pseudonym for small companies that didn't ask too many questions. I lived simply. I kept my head down, and every month I logged into my back door and checked the status of the bomb. It was still there, ticking silently, invisible to the junior devs who were busy pushing UI updates and patching minor bugs. Then came the big news. Aegis had signed a contract with Northam Logistics, one of the largest shipping conglomerates in the hemisphere. It was a deal worth tens of millions. And to cap it off, Mark and Sarah were closing a Series B funding round for another $20 million. They were about to become titans. The signing ceremony was scheduled for Black Friday, the busiest shipping day of the year. It was a publicity stunt. They were going to migrate Northam's entire fleet to the Aegis platform live in real time to prove its stability under peak load. It was arrogant. It was risky. It was perfect. I knew the date. I knew the time. The sabotage wasn't designed to be a single explosion. That's too easy to diagnose. A server crash can be rebooted. A hard drive failure can be restored from backups. I wanted something worse. I wanted rot. 2 weeks before Black Friday, I triggered phase 1. I activated a small script that introduced a subtle randomization variable into the routing algorithm. It caused 1% of deliveries to be routed to the wrong zip code. Not wildly wrong, just a town over, or a street with a similar name. It was insidious. It looked like human error. Drivers getting lost. Warehouses mislabeling packages. I monitored their internal Slack channels. Yes, I still had access to those too. The confusion was delicious. Why are we getting so many undeliverable tickets? One junior dev asked. Probably bad data entry from the client. Another replied, the code looks clean. They blamed the customer. Classic Mark arrogance trickling down. Then came Black Friday. Mark was on a live stream, standing in their mission control center, a room full of screens showing real-time maps of North America, pulsing with Aegis data streams. He looked triumphant. Sarah was beside him, holding a glass of champagne. Today, we changed logistics forever, Mark announced to the camera. We are handling 50,000 concurrent routes. The system is stable. The future is here. I was sitting in my apartment eating a bowl of cereal. I hit enter. Phase 2. The logic bomb woke up. It didn't delete data. Instead, it began to leak memory. In computer science, a memory leak is like a slow puncture in a tire. The program reserves a bit of RAM to do a task, but then fails to release it when the task is done. Over time, the available memory shrinks. The system gets slower, sluggish. At 10 a.m., the latency on the Aegis dashboard ticked up from 20 milliseconds to 50 milliseconds. Nothing to worry about at 11 a.m. It was 200 milliseconds. The junior devs started chatting nervously. Server load is higher than expected, spinning up more instances. They threw more hardware at the problem. It didn't matter. The leak was in the code, not the servers. Every new server they spun up just leaked memory faster. At 12 p.m., the system started dropping packets. Routes weren't updating. Drivers were sitting in parking lots, waiting for instructions that never came. I watched the live. Mark's smile was tight. He leaned over to whisper something to Sarah. She looked at her phone and frowned. At 1 p.m., I triggered phase 3, the encryption. This was the kill shot. The logic bomb targeted the core database, the SQL tables that held the historical traffic data, the client manifests, the proprietary algorithms that Sentry used to learn that didn't delete them. It encrypted them using a 256-bit key that only I possessed. On the live stream, the big screens in the background suddenly flickered. The maps vanished. In their place, red error boxes popped up. Database connection lost. The audio on the stream cut out, but I could see the chaos. Mark was shouting. People were running. Sarah dropped her champagne glass. I turned up the volume on my computer speakers, imagining the sound of shattering glass. The collapse was total. Northam Logistics had 10,000 trucks on the road that suddenly went blind. They had to revert to manual dispatching, paper maps and phone calls. It was a catastrophe. Millions of dollars in cargo were delayed. Perishable goods spoiled. Christmas presents missed their windows. The reputational damage to Northam was severe, but the damage to Aegis was terminal. By 3 p.m., the tech blogs were reporting the outage. By 5 p.m., the investors were calling. Mark and Sarah tried to spin it. They released a statement blaming a sophisticated external attack. They tried to paint themselves as victims of Russian hackers or corporate espionage, but the forensic teams came in. The investors hired third-party auditors to find out what happened to their money. They found the logic bomb, but they couldn't decrypt the data. The entire intellectual property of the company, the AI they had sold to the world, was locked in a digital safe, and the key was missing. Without the data, the software was useless. It was just a fancy shell with no brain. The investigation revealed something else, too. The auditors found the traces of the memory leak. They found the sloppy code maintenance. They realized that the tech innovators didn't know how their own system worked. The VC funding was pulled. Northam sued for breach of contract and damages, a lawsuit worth $50 million. Miss Innovations filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 2 weeks later. The fallout was personal, too. The stress broke them. Mark and Sarah turned on each other. Mark blamed Sarah for not securing the IP properly. Sarah blamed Mark for pushing the launch before the system was ready. They sued each other. It was ugly, public, and expensive. They were radioactive in the tech world. No one would touch them. They were the founders who crashed the uncrashable system. So, am I the asshole? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times in the quiet dark of my apartment. People tell me that what I did was disproportionate. They say I should have taken the high road. Success is the best revenge, they say. Go build something better. But how do you build a house when someone steals the foundation? Intellectual property is more than just money. It's time. It's life. They stole 3 years of my existence. They stole the nights I didn't sleep, the weekends I didn't socialize, the relationships I neglected to build Sentry. They took the raw material of my mind and monetized it for their own vanity. By sabotaging them, I wasn't just being petty. I was proving a fundamental truth. You can steal the car, but you'll never know how to fix the engine. I reclaimed my authorship. I proved that without the architect, the face and the organizer were nothing. But the counterargument haunts me. I committed a crime. Technically, I violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. If they ever traced it back to me, I'd go to federal prison and there was collateral damage. I hurt the innocent employees they hired, the junior devs, the sales staff, the receptionist. They lost their jobs because of my vendetta. I hurt the truck drivers who missed their bonuses because of the delays. I hurt the families whose packages didn't arrive. Is my justice worth their suffering? Does the fact that Mark and Sarah were thieves justify me becoming The satisfaction I feel isn't the fist-pumping triumph I expected. It's quieter. It's the grim satisfaction of balancing a ledger. A debt was owed. A debt was paid. Today, I'm doing okay. Ironically, I ended up consulting for Northam Logistics. After the Aegis crash, they were desperate. They needed a new routing system, and they needed it fast. I approached them under a pseudonym, Consultant X. I pitched them a new system. It was Sentry, but better. I had rewritten the kernel, optimized the learning algorithms, and removed the logic bomb. They loved it. They paid me a consulting fee that eclipsed what I would have made in 5 years at MS Innovations. I walked into their headquarters to install the system. As I was setting up the server, I saw a familiar face in the lobby. It was Mark. He was wearing a cheap suit, looking tired and gray. He was holding a portfolio, waiting for a visitor badge. He was trying to get a meeting, trying to salvage some scrap of a career. He didn't see me. I pulled my cap down low and walked past him. I went up to the server room, logged in, and deployed the code. My code. The screen lit up with a dashboard, clean, efficient, beautiful. Traffic flowed like water. I typed in the command to initiate the system, greater than system online. I smiled. As for the encrypted data from the old Aegis system, it's still locked. It sits on a hard drive in an evidence locker somewhere, a digital tombstone for a friendship that died 3 years ago. If I could go back, would I do it again? I think about Mark's voice on the phone that day. You're expendable. I think about the lock on the door. I think about the check for $5,000. I'd hit that enter key every single time. What about you? If someone stole your life's work, locked you out of your own creation, and used it to become rich and famous while you rot, would you let them walk away with the profit, or would you burn the building down while they were still inside?
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the story, click like and subscribe. Leave us a comment to tell us what you would have done in this situation.